Knockback, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. What? I don't even know what this, let's just keep going with it. To me, it's Colin Moriarty, it's Knockback. I have no idea what's going on. I'm so deeply disoriented the last week because I'm sick. I'm coming out of it now, but we're doing this episode late. It's Knockback. It's supposed to go up already. We're going to put it up late. Probably make the next episode of Knockback late too. I don't know, but I'm super disoriented. Welcome to the show. This is a very unusual opening. Dagan, good to see you. The thing I was thinking of when I was looking at you was you look good.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Dude,
the beard, you have the beard's at a nice, because you're not wearing one of your hats. Your hair looks good. Because you got nothing to hide.
You don't like the hat.
I don't like the hat because it comes off like you're hiding something, but you have nothing to hide. Like Tim Pool, right? He wears the beanie because he's bald.
Yeah, the bald. That's what that's where you
People that wear beanies online do it because they're bald.
Right.
You're not bald. So
and offline. Hats are just a covering up the bald thing.
But
for people my age.
Well, yeah, like our brother-in-law, for instance, he's one of those guys that lost his hair when he was a teenager and into his 20s.
Yes.
And he wears a hat constantly when he's out just to kind of cover up. It's so funny, though, because when we're all together at family functions, he doesn't wear that hat anymore. So you know that it's like kind of like a part of your equipment. But no, it's not that I don't like it. It's that you're very handsome. You look good. The beard's at a very good length. The gray is coming in. It looks nice.
The gray is... you know what? I'm getting gray. I don't know if you guys could see it on camera, but I'm getting gray. I'm like getting the gray streak here. And Helene thinks I think it's cool. And I just think it's disturbing because I didn't really have too many grays up here. It all came out in the beard first. Now I'm getting it in the hair.
Yeah, I have gray in my hair too. You won't be able to see it on these low res cameras, but I have pretty serious gray actually in parts of my hair like coming in. But Michael likes it, and
I don't know how I'm not completely gray at this point, like Gandalf gray, like with all the stress with the job stuff. You know, or the hair falling out, whatever. However stress manifests physically in a person, I think I'm holding up all right. Through all that, it doesn't seem to be taking a huge physical toll. You know what though? I thought you would laugh at this. I explained yesterday on Constellation that Lilia, my daughter, our oldest, was in the emergency room a couple of days this week. And to make a long story short, I think this is going to go up before Constellation, but she's totally fine. But she was having bad abdominal pain, like belly aches, and we were trying to get to the bottom of it. So the second time we went, they dismissed it as gas initially. She was still having kind of doubled over in pain. So we had a second trip to the emergency room on Thursday night, just a couple of days ago. And so to make a long story short, Helene was like, I'm going to take her in. This was around dinner time. And I said, all right, we should probably get CAT scans and just see if there's anything more serious, or maybe it's a kidney stone. Who the hell knows? But it seems like something's at play beyond just gas. So let's get to the bottom of it. And God forbid it's anything more serious, at least we'll know, and if we could rule it out, we'll all feel better. So around dinner time, 6 o'clock, Helene takes Lils to the emergency room. And I say, all right, listen, here's what I'm going to do. I'll take care of Graydon. I'll feed him dinner. I'll take care of the dog. I'll get everything situated. I'll meet you in Doylestown at the hospital in 2 hours. So I'll be there 8:30, and I'll start so Helene could come home and sleep because she's got to wake up at 5:30 in the morning and leave at 6:30 to go to school. She's a teacher. I could wake up whenever the hell I want. So, okay. So that was the plan. So I get to the hospital around 8:15 and I'm driving into the emergency room parking lot. And there's a pair of headlights, a set of headlights behind me that's pulling into the emergency room too. But me, I park far away. So I'm winding into the bowels of this parking lot, making all these zig and zag turns, passing all these open parking spots. In other words, this person's not parking either. They're winding to the back of the lot as well. And my whole MO is that I don't want to park near anybody, right? So I'm parking kind of equivalent to the entrance of the emergency room, but further back. And this guy's following me. So eventually I realized 45 seconds into this guy's actually following me. So now I'm thinking, the wheels are turning. Did I piss somebody off on the highway? Are they following me to get retribution or to yell at me? Did I cut somebody off? And I really don't drive like that. So I'm kind of taking stock in my head, like, no, there was nobody even on the road. It was dead, you know? So I park. Needless to say, the person pulls into the spot next to me. I'm kind of oddly calm about it because I'm like, I know I didn't do anything, right? So is this a misunderstanding? Is this guy going to tell me my taillight's out? I don't know. The car pulls in right next to me. I look over. It's my neighbors. Okay. It's Lilia's best friend's parents. Okay. He's driving. She's in the passenger seat. She rolls the window down. She's like, we heard Lilia was in the emergency room. I said, oh, yeah. So my car's running. I get out. I'm talking to them through the open window. I'm thinking they're there because they heard Lilia was in the hospital. Maybe they were in town having dinner or something and they were stopping by to be nice. Turns out she was in the emergency room. They just got out. I said, oh, what's wrong? And she said, oh, my blood pressure spiked. And I thought I was having a stroke. Now, the mom is about probably 5 to 10 years older than me. So maybe mid 50s to late 50s, maybe early 60s. The husband is older. The husband is mom and dad's age. Okay. So I'm saying, oh, is everything all right? She said, yeah, they cleared me. Everything's all right and everything like that. She goes, he gets nervous anytime anything happens because he's horrified he's going to be left alone with the kids. And instead of, kind of like trying to put a better face on it or whatever, he was just completely in agreement. He's like, I'm horrified. Like that, there's nothing could happen to her because I can't be alone with the kids. So the whole thing is she's a hypochondriac. And no matter how much she cries wolf, he takes her to the hospital or it has to, because he's terrified to be left alone with the two kids. So I thought that was the funniest thing in the world. The honesty of it, the honesty of like, I know I'm coming to the hospital and nothing's wrong with me. She reminds me very much of our Aunt Joni, who's also a notorious hypochondriac in our family. They're both from New York. They have that kind of very New York sensibility. But the whole thing is she always thinks something's wrong. And he always knows nothing's wrong, but kind of does, does it due diligence anyway, because he's horrified to be left alone with the family, which I thought was the funniest thing. I've known these people for 15 years. I never knew that was the dynamic. I just thought that was the funniest thing in the world, that he was just completely honest about it. He was like, oh, he was laughing. He's like, she can't leave me here alone type of thing. Like, if I think any slightest thing is wrong.
That's love.
That's so... I thought that was beautiful. I said, that was one of the things where immediately, like, I'm like, I have to talk about this on the podcast because that is a terrifying thing when I can't even think of a more horrifying tragedy anyway, just in terms of sadness, but to be left alone with kids as a single parent. I mean, there's probably people listening that are single parents. That's tough, man. But especially when after a tragedy is at play, right? Then that's like, oh my God, like I can't even imagine that. And you know what the thing is, Lilia's best friend's older brother, I think, is like special needs. So he really can't, he's older, he's in his early 20s, but he can't live on his own type of thing. So I think basically he's a handful for them. So for one parent to be doing everything with him, I think that thought alone is like a bridge too far to even consider. Like they have to be a team just to deal with that situation. So I just thought that was I just thought that was hilarious.
They're being followed to the annals of the parking garage. They probably thought you were really annoying because they wanted to talk to you, but you kept going deeper and deeper.
She was saying, why you follow? He's probably thinks someone's following him. But he was so adamant, like as I wound into the depths of this parking lot, he was right behind me. I'm like, this person is definitely, you know what I mean? What are the chances this person also wants to park far away from everybody, passing dozens and dozens of open parking spots? I knew something was up eventually, but I just thought there was so many depths to that. Because then I was like, are they here for Lilia? That's so weird. She's waiting for a CAT scan. Like what? My in-laws weren't even there. You know what I mean? They live 5 miles away. So I just thought that was, it was one of those things, man.
I'm in a complete world of disorientation personally.
Well, being sick will do that. I mean, I think you're busy anyway. I mean, the average bear, we're all busy, right? With different things. Life could be disorienting, but then when you're sick on top of it, not only the feeling of being sick and sort of the way your head swims and everything, but just kind of losing losing momentum or kind of falling behind on stuff, every day, cooking meals, taking care of the house, paying bills, all that kind of thing. You get set back with tasks, even the easiest administrative things. And then it's like, I always think about that with the kids with school. Like, I feel bad for them when they miss school because you kind of lose that footing. Now you got to catch up. You miss a test. You miss 2 days of homework. I guess it's the same thing in our adult life. We kind of lose ground.
Yeah, I just have lost all track of time because I'm pretty feral as it is with my time and all that, and like my sleep schedule and everything. But like, yes, so it'll go live the day after this goes live. But yeah, we did Constellation. I was really having a hard time holding on for some of that episode. And then
were you? I didn't see that.
Yeah, I just tried my best to just be stoic. Right after it ended, I went immediately back to bed. Like, walked from the office into the bedroom and went to sleep probably within 2 minutes of when we were done. And then I woke up like 5 hours later or something. And I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm like totally disoriented. I'm feeling better, but then I'm up for a while. I woke up a few minutes before we started recording, really. It's 3:14. I woke up probably at 2:30 or something like that.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
So you're jet lagged. It's like jet lag without changing time zones. It's that same feeling.
And I don't know. I'm just bummed in the sense that I kind of feel like a schlub. Like I haven't worked out very much, which is very unusual. I work out every day. I went 2 days in a row without working out, which is like, makes me want to feel like I want to throw up, although I'm probably burning more calories being sick anyway, but
yeah, you'll get back into it. You can't be too hard on it. Sometimes you just got to rest. Your body, and you know what, dude, you've been burning it at both ends, and sometimes I know my body, it just kind of calls it for you. It just jumps in and is like, all right, we're shutting down for a while, and then you just got to kind of abide. Like, get the rest, drink the fluids, chill out. You know what I mean? That type of thing. It's like the body intervenes eventually, I feel like. At least that's the way I operate. Like, I know when I'm really stressed out, like peak stress, my body will go into like flu mode. And it's not even flu. It's just like, all right, like, we can't operate like this. We have to kind of recalibrate. And
yeah.
That could be what's happening,
Yeah, I got it. I think I just got really walloped by this thing, which is strange. Like, but nonetheless, here we are. All right. So we were going to do an episode, and we are going to do it now, about Starship Troopers. The reason that I wanted to do this was it just seems mega relevant right now in an unusual way because of Helldivers 2 on PlayStation, which is heavily inspired in a lot of ways by at least the aesthetic of Starship Troopers. And I thought since we had enough lead time, I was like, why don't we read the book and watch the movie? The book is really short. The movie's 2 hours and change or whatever. And then we'd have like a holistic view of what's going on with this story. You'll find this funny because eventually we'll go through it. I don't know if it's going to show through, but these are all of my notes from the book. Nice. Like, as I was going through it, most of it is just like points to lore and random things, like throwaway lines that I thought were interesting. So we'll go through those. I watched the movie, of course, and I have notes about that, and maybe trying to rectify the two as well would be interesting. But I'm curious what your experiences are with Starship Troopers. If you saw the film when it came out in the 90s, but maybe more importantly, if you ever read the book before now. Book, and this is my copy from the 90s. Robert Heinlein, well-known sci-fi writer, maybe his biggest book, written in 1959. The film, trying to get off the ground for many years, finally does. In 1997, I believe it comes out. And I saw it in the theater with Dad, and certainly didn't understand it as well as I probably should have. So, all right, Dig, talk to me about Starship Troopers. What are your thoughts as we begin?
Yeah, you know what's funny, man? I never read this book, and I never read any Heinlein. And you know what's funny about that is he's always mentioned as the classic science fiction trifecta of classic sci-fi authors, with Asimov, with Arthur Clarke. And I always wanted to read Stranger in a Strange Land in particular because I always hear how influential that novel was. But I think I got lost. I sort of like lost track of the fact that this was a late 50s novel. It wasn't just the classic late 90s sci-fi movie, that actually derives from a book. So I went back and read it for the first time. and really enjoyed it. I mean, I know we're going to get into higher level thoughts about the book. It's definitely an odd duck as far as novels and as far as sci-fi goes. I'm not sure I ever read anything quite like it, but I did really enjoy the experience. And the funny thing about the Paul Verhoeven film is I saw it only once. I believe I saw it in the theater, but I had so little memory of it for some reason. I think it got caught up for me in the wash of all the 90s science fiction films of that era. Like it just kind of got washed out of my memory by, like, let's say, the Star Wars special editions from January to March of 97. Later on in the later to very late 90s and 99, starting with Phantom Menace with the Star Wars prequels and all the other science fiction, it just kind of got tumbled around. And I kind of completely lost track of, I didn't remember any of it. So when I sat down to watch the movie again and really enjoyed it, the movie is so fucking good. I got to watch it twice. I got to watch it kind of all the way through and just enjoy the ride and just kind of casually watch. And then the second time I was able to actually really be a little more analytical, freeze frame, go back. Did I just see that? Did I just hear that? That type of thing. So that was cool. And you know what the other thing was? I got to read the book and I listened to the audiobook, which I think was like a 1970s to early 80s cassette version of the audiobook, which I also found very enjoyable. And for some reason had a very Leave It to Beaver sort of father knows best 50s vibe to the narration that just worked for the story. Like it really took me back to like post World War II, post Korean War, earlier sci-fi. The narrator had like a really charming, subtle lisp that almost sounded like an adult Linus from Peanuts, and it just worked. It was just channeling like all the 50s for me. So I got to really kind of like explore it, Starship Troopers on all sides. And of course, coming off of the inspiration of Helldivers and how huge that's been. And just the whole humans fighting giant arachnids, bug hunt, sort of aliens. I think somebody in our posse, I'm not sure if it was Gene or Cog or somebody, was saying about the game, which I haven't been able to play personally, but it looks so fun. Just like we love our classic, amazing science fiction video games, right? Think MGS or BioShock, you know, bitchin' story, crazy texture with the characters and the narrative. But sometimes you just want to play a video game, right? Sometimes you just want that classic arcade experience. Like this is just fun. It doesn't have to be any more dimension to it than that. And that's why it looks so fun to me, that game. And the fact that it's evoking all these other things that it came out of. But Starship Troopers, man, when you read it and when you watch the film, you realize, especially the novel, like, holy shit, man, like this thing was way ahead of its time and very influential on all the pop and nerd culture stuff that came later, whether it was role-playing games, video games, science fiction movies, the Alien franchise, Star Wars, things like Dead Space. You see so much of what we know of sci-fi now in this, you know, that it was so cool to go back and just on so many levels, but especially just for Robert Heinlein and seeing like, okay, I know Asimov, I know Arthur Clarke, I know Bradbury, I know William Gibson. This was a nice way to check off the list of classic sci-fi authors of somebody who was a visionary, really. And that I knew the least of with him. And then I kind of put me on a rabbit hole of watching him on 60s and 70s television, you know, as far as like asking him questions about, you know, the actual humans going into space and his perspective on all that. It was really cool. This was a really cool episode, and, you know, a lot more dimension than your average Knockback episode, because maybe it's because we're tackling two different forms of media, but I got a lot out of it.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, so I read the book when I was a kid, but I don't really remember anything about it. And I had said that I got this copy of the book with one of those sci-fi and fantasy novel Columbia House type things where they'd send you a shit ton of books for free.
Oh, that's cool.
And then you'd have to buy books, but I just never did. We've talked about stealing in the past, and I was like, I never stole anything, but that's not true. I was pretty good at, not good, I mean, it's a bad thing, but Columbia House and these book things, I probably got like 50 CDs from those without buying anything.
Literally. You mentioned that before.
Yeah, like literally. Because you used to get the thing where it's like select 18 CDs for a penny. And like they literally would send them to you. And then and I'd be like, and then you'd have to buy like 3 of them at market rate or something like that later within a year or something. And I just never would. And I got away with it. It's kind of similar to how I used to sell things on eBay in middle school and never pay the fee. And then I just never paid it. Because you used to have to send in a check.
You know what's fascinating about that? A company like that must have been built to sustain that sort of thing. Like their model was built around like, we know a certain percentage of people, we're never going to see a dime from a certain percentage of these people. And it still worked. So there had to be, for every column, there had to be the person, the sucker paying a lot more money.
Yeah, I'm not proud of it because from the very initial moment, I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm just getting these and I'll worry about the repercussions later. But by the time I was an adult, those things were gone. Really. Maybe because of people like me and of the internet, of course, as well. So it's funny, I guess, and we'll jump back and forth as we want to between the film and the book, but I'm surprised you hold the film in such high regard because I think the film's a complete bastardization of the book and misses what the book's about completely. Now I know that it's intentional and I don't mind that even, but I just feel like almost nothing about the book that makes the book good is in the movie. Even the mobile infantry they're just infantry with light armor on. It's like, that's not what they're
so different.
Dude, the first chapter in the book is awesome. It's them on a random planet by held by a third race that you very rarely hear about. And they're fucking them up. You know, they're jumping over the houses in their armor and launching nuclear weapons out of their shoulder packs and, you know, killing these skinnies, I think they call them.
Yeah, which aren't even in the film.
Right. Exactly. Like they're not even mentioned in the film at all. In the book, there's this race called the skinnies that the humans are fighting, and the skinnies are allied with the arachnid bug race, and they kind of get them to turn on the bugs. That's like a whole sub-arc in the book that's not in the movie at all. But
they go from enemy to ally.
The book is
they're more humanoid.
The book is substantially better than the movie, I think, in my opinion. Now they're different. I think the book is authentically great. I think the film it's funny. It's paradoxical. It's
totally.
It's very much. It's like RoboCop with the fake commercials and everything. It's interesting, and I know that Verhoeven had a problem with the book's interpretation of politics and that he thought it was somewhat fascistic and stuff like that. I'm not so sure I really agree with that, and we can get into that. But in fact, I would think it's explicitly not fascistic in a lot of different ways. But it feels, knowing that he did that on purpose, knowing that he didn't even finish the book according to him, and decide, like, that's pretty shitty that you would direct a film and not even have finished the source material, of which it's 200 pages and it can be read in like a night. And that they knew that by this point, Robert Heinlein was dead and there would be no fight back from whoever owned the rights and all the rest.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. I mean, it is. It's sort of Stephen King's Shining versus Stanley Kubrick's Shining. Completely two different things. And yeah, Verhoeven brings that European sensibility, what we saw with RoboCop and what we see with Total Recall, of making, building on this sci-fi foundation, but making it very satirical, which I liked, but it doesn't serve the book if you're looking for one-to-one. You know what I mean? The book is very different. I don't see fascism in the book. I think but I do think it's on the level genuine gung-ho. Like, it's certainly not satirical.
It's anti-communist.
What I found funny about the book, Kyle, I don't think I've ever read science fiction that felt more procedural. Like, it felt very little action, right? From the jump, very little action throughout the book, a lot of dialogue, a lot of explanation, a lot of exposition, a pretty high level amount of sort of detail and description, but never boring. A lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation, a lot of sort of Johnny talking to his teacher. Here's a chapter of Johnny dealing with his dad. It's a lot of sort of FaceTime between two people. Now Johnny with an officer, Johnny with one of his colleague soldiers, flashbacks, you're moving back and forth in time, but it's cohesive and it's enjoyable, even if there's very little action. I think it was probably without being saddled with what we know of the movie now and sort of the brutality of the action and the gore and everything like that. I think the books, if you know that the book's not like that, it's an enjoyable experience on their own. I like that they're different. I actually do like that they're different, but it does feel like Verhoeven's film. And I'm not sure. I should also mention there's at least 4 movies after this, of which I don't know anything about anything.
Yeah, me neither.
Except this initial film. But Verhoeven's version of the film is so different that it could have just been its own thing. Like, why call it Transformers if it's not Transformers? You know what I mean? That type of thing. Like this, it's so different that it just could have been its own work of science fiction, really.
Yeah, I don't really know. It missed so much of what makes, I think, Starship Troopers, the book, interesting. The film is cool. It looks pretty good. It holds up pretty well. It's got this like very bright, kinetic sort of movement to it, and lots of young, pretty people. And but even that kind of misses the entire point. They show it a little bit, but it's like the ranks of the military, the Terran military, whatever, is pretty fucked up. Like everyone's missing limbs and everything's all screwed up. And this is where I think that the fascistic thing, I think it's just an oversimplification, because I think that, as I said earlier, and I don't think you heard me, but the book is definitely anti-communist. I mean, there's no doubt about that in my mind, based on the things Heinlein explicitly calls the bugs communists at some point in the book. And you could tell it's a hive mind with all these different groups that are tied to like their specific roles in this group. But there's so much brilliance in the book too, through the lens in which it was written, because he wrote it in the late 50s. We hadn't really even sent anyone into space in any major way at this point. You have to kind of make it all up, and that's what sci-fi and fantasy is, generally speaking. But he does a pretty decent job of visualizing a world that didn't exist and doesn't exist still. That's 7. So the one of the cool things that I appreciate is that whole XX century thing they do in the book. So if you guys haven't read the book, they never say when it happens. They'll just refer to different times as XX century, but you can tell what centuries they're kind of talking about by the modifier. So it'll say like TH. So you're like, all right, so that's like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. So something far away. And you figure out that this is a long distant world, not just 100 years hence or whatever, but hundreds of years, half a century or half a millennia hence. And I think that that's pretty neat. I also think the book does a really nice job. And this is a surprising thing about the Verhoeven book is, and maybe it's to get into the fascistic elements of it, is like the general whiteness of it, but the characters aren't really white in the book. I mean, you don't find until late in the book that, Johnny's Filipino. You find that out because of the Tagalog conversation, I think, and it's kind of like referenced in that way, but they never explicitly say it. He's not white.
No.
So I don't...
Filipino, in fact.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And so I don't really see the fascistic I don't see the fascistic overtones in the book really, because, and I'm curious what you think about this. It's like, it's not describing a brutal militarism per se. It's describing sacrifice and getting a reward for that. The book does a really important thing over and over and over and over again of differentiating between kind of a hierarchical military situation that gives you the right to be a politician or to vote and to be a citizen. And then the fact that like people still have freedom to do whatever they want. You see it over and over again. The dad is, Johnny's family is rich. They're business people. He's going to go to Harvard, which still exists in this world.
Right.
And he's going to do all these kinds of things, and people have the freedom of expression and freedom of speech and association and all that. It's societally unfascistic. I think it's just saying that and I don't know that I agree with it, but like to be a full citizen, you need to be able to you need to be willing. Those who are not willing to lay their own lives out for the greater good can't have the full ramifications of the power of the vote. And I don't know that that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't. It's not what the world we live in. I don't know. I just don't see that as fascistic in any way. I see that as an alternate democratic system wherein everyone seems to buy in. I mean, from our perspective, maybe we're only getting like a very vanilla perspective from Johnny, and that it's actually way worse for everyone because it's all through his perspective. But
sure,
it doesn't seem that way. It seems like people are pretty free to do what they want. So I without that lever of power, I don't see the fascism at all.
Yeah, it's as we talk about it, it does become more obvious that it almost feels like Verhoeven's version is making fun of the book a little bit, which is interesting. And I don't feel protective of the novel. I feel like that's Verhoeven's. I feel like that's his right to do that. But it does feel like, again, it's so different, not in just scopes of all the intricacies, and the niceties, but just in the fact of the tone. It's completely different because the movie is certainly satirizing the military, the brutality of the war machine, a violent force first mentality, strike hard, strike first, ask questions later type of thing. And the fact of, really bookended by really fiercely satirical start and ending, where it's like, celebrating the enemy's humanity and like, he's afraid, you know what I mean? That type of thing. It's it does seem very European, which is interesting. And it does remind me about what I learned with RoboCop and like, okay, this is satire when I was too young to realize it in the mid 80s. You know what I mean? But later on, it's more of the same. And I think Verhoeven does that a lot with Total Recall too. He builds it on this bedrock of sci-fi and then kind of says what he wants to say and delivers his message, delivers his payload through his version of it. But I think the book is interesting because it does seem like especially if you kind of embrace this late 50s, 1959 perspective, only a decade or so removed from the end of World War II, right? And it feels like the book is almost saying like, what if we fought the Nazis again, but the Nazis were giant insects? And it's a genuine thing of like citizen versus civilian. Like, what if you had to earn your right to vote? What if you had to earn your station? And of course, there's these wealthy people like Johnny's family that it might be a little more easy to free yourself from the potential dangers of being beholden to military service. But what if there was this rich kid that wanted to serve? And that sort of thing. There's a lot of depth to it. And I got caught out too. I think I remembered us years ago talking about Tolkien's Lord of the Rings novels and the films too, but specifically about Tolkien writing these books. I got caught up in the feeling of a similar thing I remember thinking Tolkien sort of set up modern fantasy. Like he's responsible for so many of the things that make up modern fantasy. Without Tolkien, fantasy would look completely different, right? But what was he building on? What kind of visionary was he? Like, what was the ground? What was he taking and building on? And of course, back then we talked about the ancient Greek stuff and, that sort of thing. But with this, I was thinking when it comes to Heinlein and what a visionary he is, like, what is he building on? Because there's so much in the trappings of the sci-fi, the tech, and the vehicles and the enemy and the whole procedural thing with how the military operates. It was so forward thinking that it's almost like a Beowulf to Lord of the Rings thing. I was thinking like, what was he looking at? Or was he sort of developing all of this stuff out of whole cloth, which is pretty fascinating. And I mean, talk about a forefather of sci-fi, man. I don't know what he was channeling, but just in getting lost in sort of the world that he built in this book is, I mean, maybe one of the most influential things I've ever come across as far as like, wow, without you realize after you read this 200 or so pages, it's like, wow, I don't think sci-fi would have looked anything like we know it now without this book. It's insane. And you know what the other thing is, Kyle? If you read this book, and then still to this day, my favorite bug hunt sort of thing is Aliens, right? The second Alien film, which I think is amazing in terms of world building and story and atmosphere. But if you look at how Aliens was so inspired by this novel, and then how in turn the Aliens film informed the Starship Troopers film, it's this weird dragon eating its tail thing, this cyclical cycle of influence that is so interesting. It just kind of everything feeded back into itself, oddly, because there is so much aliens in this movie that the Aliens film and the Starship Troopers film. It's just that you're making it a satire. It really felt more like a Melrose Place 90s California high school movie, American Pie, mashed up with like Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. You know what I mean? And sort of presenting this military sci-fi far-flung future military thing kind of mashed up with this sci-fi melodrama and then building a satire out of it. I enjoyed this a lot more than I remember liking it. And but it is different. You got to kind of steel yourself for knowing that the book and the movie, two completely different things.
Yeah, it kind of bothers me that they're so different. It's like, what was even the point of making the Starship Troopers? You could have really made it something else. It made me figure, it's surprising that no one has tried to come back to this and be like, we can do this better than this. And even do maybe a mini series or something. It would be pretty expensive, especially, but I just kept envisioning that first chapter of them fighting the skinnies. It's like, this would look so crazy if you spent money on this and really got into the nitty gritty of it. It just felt so different, the two things, as if they're almost not associated with each other in some way at all.
Yeah, they're opposite.
But what do you think about, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I want to start going through these and pulling these things out and seeing what I even outlined. But I was curious what you thought of the bugs. They come from a planet Klendathu. So in the movie, it's so. Let me back up. Actually, in the book, I think, and this goes into the authors seeing ahead of time and really being able to flesh things out in a very effective way. Is I love that we're dealing with like an arachnid bug style race. We just describe them like that. We don't really know what they are. It's like exobiology. It's another species evolved somewhere else entirely and all the rest. But they are a spacefaring, technologically advanced species in the book. In the movie, they're complex and they're a hive mind, but they fight using, I guess, their own terrestrial skills and send their people or their creatures, their little eggs or whatever, to other planets by shooting them into space with like we see some of the bugs, I think, shooting their little blue things out, which is super cool. I mean, that's a cool thing in and of itself, but I really loved the vision of the Klendathu bugs as being like this very complex race that literally made spaceships and has weapons and all that kind of stuff. And that is them in the book. Did you pick up on that difference between them in the book and in the film? And what did you think would be better?
It's funny. I think, that might be one of the few similarities for me between the book and the film, or at least, from the perspective of my takeaway, is that it felt like in both, and maybe I was missing something in the book, but it felt like in both, like there was this thing of, why are we even fighting each other? That type of thing. More so in the movie, in its own satirical way, seems to be expressing a thing of like, maybe the bugs are just being protective of their whole home world and their whole way of life and everything. And the humans are the same thing. And the aggression might be unnecessary, but it's just built up to this thing of like, that's almost just what's expected. Like both sides are conditioned to fight each other. Right. Whereas the book, I felt like, what was interesting about the book, man? I thought that for as procedural as it felt, and for as much as it's describing this world and all the ins and outs, especially from a late 50s perspective, which must have been pretty jarring because this is really inventive, heady stuff for the time. It doesn't get descriptive on a molecular level. And in fact, it leaves a lot to the imagination. Like it kind of outlines everything, the world building, and says, okay, but you imagine exactly how it looks, or you imagine exactly how it operates, or you imagine exactly how big this creature is, or how large this spacecraft is, or something. It's very interesting because I think that's what's so compelling about it is it's having you do some of the legwork. It's not describing page after page of how anything looks or how anything feels or how it smells or how it tastes or anything. But that was one of the things in the book where I found the description of why both sides are fighting to be a little elusive. Like it gives you the perspective of Johnny and it gives you more the perspective of the humans. Obviously, you don't really get the perspective of either race of aliens. But there's something there in the book where I was like, is it saying that the bugs need to be dealt with, or is it saying this is just the nature of war where it's just force first, which the movie was certainly saying.
Yeah, I think it's funny, the book doesn't get into the geopolitics. Like the war is already kind of going on, I think, when we are inserted into the story into the book.
Yeah,
because I'm reading some of my notes here now, or like looking at what I've tagged, and a lot of it is stuff about the armor and all of the rest, and the way that they fight. What's interesting, I think, about the movie to a lot of people with Clendathu and the bugs is that they are, in the movie, the victims. It's an important part of the story. Like the bugs aren't trying to fight. They do end up fighting. They end up launching one of their asteroids at the Earth and destroying a city, which happens in the book too, although it happens differently in the book. But it's interesting reading the discourse recently, especially that like, wow, the bugs are actually not the good. It's all kind of neutral, I guess, in the movie, but the bugs are kind of the victims of human expansionism. While in the book, it's a little more nebulous. It seems like maybe everyone's fighting, and they're traveling light years using their drives. So obviously, this is a far spread Mass Effect like universe, or galaxy, I should say, where everyone is in on it with each other. So I'm going to start pulling these out, start going through a few of these here, some notes. One of the things I noted, Dig, that I thought was cool was the idea that in the mobile infantry, everyone fights. Everyone drops into battle and everyone fights. Like there's no such thing as the chaplain or the cook or anything like that. If you don't fight, you're nothing in the mobile infantry. What did you think of that? I thought that was
I thought that was really cool. I don't think I've ever seen that in anything. Where it's like, yeah, the cooks and the maintenance crew and everybody, every person to a man and woman are meant to, do battle. They're all soldiers, essentially, which is kind of really cool. But if that's the thing, if that's how you're owning your citizenship and your station and your right to vote and, your political influence or whatever, as far as being a part of society, then it does make sense. Again, it's really creative.
Let's see, another thing I pulled out here. So the race that they're fighting in the beginning are 8 or 9 feet tall.
Yeah.
Much skinnier than we are, with a higher body temperature. They don't wear any clothes and they stand out in a set of snoopers like a neon sign. And they say that they would rather fight them than the bugs. So that's interesting. I wonder what the point of them not being in the film was. Like this third race.
Yeah, I think that adds a lot of dimension to the book and sort of this love triangle of hostility that you kind of see, and also the fact that they're all different. You have the insects being portrayed, especially in the film, but I guess to some degree in the book too, as just being the arachnids or the bugs, as just being like giant insects, brainless, operating in a hive mind, like a group of wasps or something. And then the skinnies as being more intelligent and more humanoid in build, although they're super tall. I like that they're creepy. And I like that it gives that whole conceit of, okay, this alien species aligns themselves with one race and then trades at some point and then becomes an ally to humanity. I thought that was an interesting bit of depth that the movie and texture that the movie lacked, but you didn't really need it for this, good versus bad satire and who's the bad guy and all that kind of thing. I think it would have just muddied up the movie.
I'm seeing here too. So for people, you don't play Helldivers, but one of the major things about Helldivers, people appreciate this. This is a quote. this is when they're trying to get off the planet after they fucked up the skinnies. Quote, right after that moment, I was feeling unusually expendable, almost expended because I was hearing the sweetest sound in the universe, the beacon the retrieval boat would land on, sounding our recall. The beacon is a robot rocket fired ahead of the retrieval boat, just a spike that buries itself in the ground and starts broadcasting that welcome, welcome music. The retrieval boat homes in on it automatically 3 minutes later, and you had better be on hand because the bus can't wait, and there won't be another one for one along.
Good shit.
That's Helldivers. And you can tell that. See, the funny thing about the influence of Starship Troopers on Helldivers is it's the book that inspires Helldivers, I think, even more than the film, because that kind of shit's not in the movie at all. Like they don't show them dropping in capsules so that's an important thing. Like the capsule dropping is in the book. It's not shown in the film. They all kind of drop on a because there's a part in the book where they don't drop like that. Late on, they drop in a regular ship, and they remark about how weird it is that they're not dropping in like hell diving basically into a crazy experience. They're actually kind of getting there and able to walk out of the ship and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little piece of Helldivers right there for people that have not read the book, which I thought was kind of cool. Let me see.
That is, and you know what? In the book too, they mention, right? They drop like sort of like this diversionary sort of capsules that are supposed to, meant to confuse the enemy and stuff like that. So the book gets much more tactical on how they operate, how humanity operates, how the mobile infantry operates from a tactical perspective. That's fascinating in the book, and the way they have the countermeasures and they launch that ahead of a drop to confuse the enemy and all that kind of thing. So if you're looking for all that sort of tactical procedural military stuff, again, like there's something so inventive about all of it, but I don't know. Heinlein might have been the first person to do this kind of thing, where he injected that level of realism, even from a late 50s perspective, which is really cool. And the movie misses out on that. The movie's more straight up, almost like Aliens does it, where it's like colonial Marines. They're designed to come in and kick ass. They have the weapons for it and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, the movie version of Starship almost comes off more like colonial Marine style.
Sure.
Stuff.
Yeah.
I thought this was interesting. This is the beginning of chapter 3. This is a total throwaway line, but it goes to show you the world, the lens, the scientific lens through which this book was written. Here's what he says. Quote, I did basic at Camp Arthur Curry on the northern prairies along with a couple of thousand other victims, and I do mean camp as the only permanent buildings there were to shelter equipment. We slept and ate in tents. We lived outdoors, if you call that living, which I didn't at the time. I was used to a warm climate. It seemed to me that the North Pole was just 5 miles north of camp and getting closer. Ice age returning, no doubt. So this is a throwaway line, but in the post-war period, it's important to realize that people thought that the Earth was going to get colder and return us to an ice age. Now, obviously, climate is deeply cyclical. It's been so warm on the Earth that there has been no ice on the surface, and it has been so cold on Earth that there has been nothing but ice on the surface. So things vacillate greatly. But I thought that was, I noted that because I was like, that's so interesting. They used to call it global cooling or global dimming. And it was this idea that sunlight was going to get worse and we're going to have more in the atmosphere and it was going to stop sunlight from getting in. And we were going to have this colder and colder situation. And this was prevalent probably through the 70s, at least, until people were like, actually, the planet is being greenhouse gassed pretty badly. It's actually retaining its heat. And I just thought that was interesting. It's a little piece of something from that era he's writing it in, where ice age returning, no doubt. So it's getting colder in their experience, which I thought was cool. All right, let's see what else we have here. Sorry, I'm just reading as I go.
I wonder if that sort of thing, like that sort of background texture in the novel too, you could also read into it like that gives humanity a sort of urgency. Like we have to deal with this enemy before we have to deal with this thing that's inevitably coming. Like let's not deal with this when it's 30 degrees colder or something. That type of thing, which gives humanity, like it gives this background vehicle of why, explanation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm reading this. I don't know why I don't know what was interesting about that to me. That might have been during my early fever dreams. No, Yeah, I don't know. Well, all right. So let me get into a few things I wrote here about the film as we go further into it. Did you notice the advertisements in the movie?
Mm-hmm.
So I found 4 companies. I don't know if you found more. AT&T obviously was pretty prominent. Oakley.
Yep. Oh, I didn't see Oakley.
Adidas and Airwalk. Prominent Airwalk ads.
I missed the Airwalk.
A lot of this was during
that?
the football game, like that pseudo.
Oh.
And by the way, wasn't it funny? So like, I'm like, a shitty arena football game is like the big thing in the future, is like this shitty form of football. It's interesting. And I was especially intrigued by the fact that everyone was 30 years old. Guess I should throw that out there as well.
I always feel that way, so I don't even mention it anymore.
They were. I mean, I was looking, the people, I don't have it open anymore. So like Casper Van Dien was born in 1955, or no, I'm sorry, 1968. He's 55 now, which would put him in his, what?
Yeah, he was in his 20s?
Late 20s? These are supposed to be, and the same thing with Dina Meyer is the same age. Denise Richards a little younger, but they're all supposed to be like teenage high school graduate. It's like, I don't know, man. Why can't we just for once have people that look right to this role?
They were still doing that in the 90s, even in film. Like it wasn't even just a TV thing. And yeah, the football thing was funny, man, because I felt like that whole segment for all the world building in the movie was a little lazy. It was like, we're going to make futuristic football. We'll paint the football silver. It was like, seriously, is this? We'll give them less equipment and sort of mash up. They look like rugby players, maybe with a hockey helmet instead of a football helmet. And they play on a gym floor that's clearly covered in a sheet of vinyl. Like that's futuristic football. Like it just felt, that was one of the things where it almost felt like you could almost dismiss all of the things that feel cheesy and just kind of lump it all in with the satirical feel of it. So it works. But I do wonder if a lot of those things are intentional or if it was just like skirting the budget type of thing. You know, like a lot of the movie feels like we spared no expense. And then some of the movie feels like, why is that so cheesy? But then you're like, oh, it's a satire, like they're making fun of everything.
Yeah, but it also feels, because it goes right into like why it was nothing sacred to Verhoeven in the film. Even little things, I felt like it was intentionally disrespectful. Like Johnny Rico in the book is really good at math. Like he's constantly doing it, and they talk about it constantly. Make sure you have your math books. Make sure you go tutor and all this. And then in the very beginning of the movie, they show him getting like a 30 on his math final.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are you diminishing like who the character's supposed to be? It doesn't make any sense. Also,
dumb rich kid.
Also, an important thing to note is that, and I think this is a really key part of Starship Troopers, is that there's almost no women in the book. And it's not a misogynistic thing to say. They go into it over and over again. Like women become pilots. So that's kind of what happens in this, that men go into the infantry. And even when they have a saying in the book, like when you're on a ship, a mixed sex ship, it's like beyond the 30th or something, they say. And that's like where the women are. And how like he perks up when he even hears a woman's voice.
Yes.
I don't know why they like just totally squashed it into a more Battlestar Galactica. There's like a Battlestar Galactica style shower scene. I was thinking. You know?
Yes. Very Battlestar Galactica. Yep. Oh, that's another one. Yeah, I was thinking what work of sci-fi was the same thing where there was this parity between male and female. Yeah, in the book even there's a lot of talk about the mom, but you don't see a lot of interaction with the mom. So it's purposely, you know what? It purposely makes you feel like you're in the military of that era. There wasn't a lot of women in the military in the 50s, and that's what it feels like. You know, it feels like it's saying that. And, you know, the fact that there's precious few women and they're a fantasy and it's a treat when they're around and all that kind of thing. The movie is like the 90s way of saying, how can we get Denise Richards in here? How can we get a hot chick in here?
Right. Or a couple of them, really.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because Rico's so dumb. It's like, dude, open your eyes. You know, my God, you're embarrassing all of us.
It's so funny, man. He's the pretty, rich, entitled kid, but he's heroic, but he's dumb at math. Like, yeah, you're removing the layers of nuance, you know, from the book.
Well, even just Dizzy like throwing herself at him like constantly, and it's like, It's like, dude, just
Pretty shameless.
it's interesting. I outlined this because I thought, again, so we're speaking out of a book written in the late 50s. The bomb is a major part of our lives at that time. And they answer pretty early in the book, which I think is important. Like, why don't we just glass these planets? You know? And so here's what is said. Quote, well, you see, sir, if we can use an H-bomb, and as you said, it's no checker game, it's real, it's war, and no one is fooling around. Isn't it a sort of ridiculous to go crawling around in the weeds, throwing knives and maybe getting yourself killed and even losing the war when you've got a real weapon you can use to win? What's the point in a whole lot of men risking their lives with obsolete weapons when one professor type can do much more by just pushing a button? This is actually in the movie, which is cool.
Yep.
Because he puts his hand up and gets the knife thrown to him through his hand or whatever. And the professor says, quote, there can be circumstances when it's just as foolish to hit an enemy city with an H-bomb as it would be to spank a baby with an axe. War is not violence and killing pure and simple. War is controlled violence for a purpose. The purpose of war is to support your government's decisions by force. The purpose is never to kill the enemy just to be killing him, but to make him do what you wanted him to do. Not killing, but controlled and purposeful violence. But it's not your business or mine to decide the purpose of the control. It's never a soldier's business to decide when or where or how or why he fights. That belongs to the statesmen and the generals. The statesmen decide why and how much. The generals take it from there and tell us where and how. We supply the violence. Other people, older and wiser heads, as they say, supply the control, which is as it should be. So I thought that was a pretty interesting way of dealing with the, I guess, reasonable question during this era of real American history of like, well, why are we even sending infantry into anywhere ever again at this point? And I guess the answer is because we're not trying to fuck things up just to fuck things up. That's a surprisingly unfascistic answer, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, very well said. Yeah, and definitely calls up Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the argument, and, you know, what would have still been a contemporary sort of topic of conversation back then, and a answer that seems reasonable.
Another thing I thought was cool was that they there's just some interesting things about their training in the book. And they say this, quote, the rifles used to simulate aimed weapons were loaded with blanks except 1 in 500 rounds at random, which was a real bullet. Dangerous, yes and no. It's dangerous just to be alive, and a non-explosive bullet probably won't kill you unless it hits you in the head or the heart, and maybe not then. What that 1 in 500 for real did was to give us a deep interest in taking cover, especially as we knew that some of the rifles were being fired by instructors who were crack shots and actually trying their best to hit you. If the round happened not to be blank, they assured us that they would not intentionally shoot a man in the head, but accidents do happen. So there's kind of a piece of that in the movie too.
Yeah.
As well as someone takes their helmet off and
friendly fire.
Right, exactly.
That part was shocking. I was like, whoa, I didn't, that was one of the things that took me off guard. I totally didn't see that coming and didn't remember it.
Let's see what else here. Yeah, because it's funny how, like the lashing scene happens in the movie, but Rico's own lashing is kind of something that just isn't even described, because the book goes into how it was more difficult to watch someone else be lashed than to be lashed, which is something they kind of remove as well, which I get. I mean, I guess that's something you need a book to kind of get you through.
Hold your hand, yeah. The corporal punishment thing is interesting, though. Sort of waves of paths of glory of like possibly, I mean, certainly in the movie, like unjustified corporal punishment for something that's kind of just the whole system is set up so that, you know, it's set up for failure and sort of poking fun at that. It really, I mean, the satire really hits you over the head. The thing is, I've heard so many people say that, especially when this movie came out initially in the late 90s, like some people weren't reading it as satire. If you don't get this movie as satire in the first 30 seconds to a minute, your eyes are shut. Like, there's no way you cannot see this as satire. Like, the propaganda, join the effort sort of war films with the graphics and the crash zooms and everybody acting cheesy and the kid decked out in his military gear. Like, it's clearly poking fun at the war machine, you know?
I love that one.
So I don't know how you wouldn't read that.
That one scene where it's like one of the propaganda films where they are handing the guns around to the kids and handing them bullets and stuff like that. It's so funny. It's so good. Like, I don't know how you don't get why that's funny.
There should have been more of those cutaways. The momentum is weird because I feel like it's going in this way and it's peppering these sort of cutaway sequences that are clearly, that really work, especially now, so many years later, because the graphics are very 90s, sort of rudimentary and dated. So it only adds to the satire. But there's a certain part of the movie, a couple of times maybe even, where the satire kind of crashes up against melodrama, and it just starts feeling more like, I don't know, think of another movie that would remind you of this, like Pearl Harbor or something. Or what was the one where they have to take, I can't believe I'm forgetting the title of this, where they have to take out the comet that's hurtling towards Earth.
Oh, Deep Impact or Armageddon. They're both
Armageddon.
Yeah.
Or, it starts to feel like that, and you start to lose the thread of the satire, and then it kind of it gets reminded, like, oh yeah, we're supposed to be making fun of this stuff, which is weird. Like, it's a little inconsistent at times. The satire doesn't run all the way through cohesively. So it feels a little sloppy, because I like the satire. I like being reminded. If you're going to do that, then let's have it, that type of thing.
What do you make of the entire notion? Because I'll get into more quotes about this, but what do you make about the entire notion of like predicated citizenship? Like, where, because again, they don't tell you anything in this book, really. It doesn't seem militaristic to me. It seems like it's more about a group of people obsessed with dying for something, or at least struggling and sacrificing for something. You see
so patriotism, really,
right? Like it's a super form of patriotism. But I guess in reading the book, as an adult, I was expecting to be like hit over the head with like these fascistic themes and all this kind of stuff. And the movie obviously goes a great lengths, especially aesthetically, to be like, yeah, these are the Nazis. Do you get it? They're wearing black dusters. Do you get it? They're wearing the eagle looks like a fucking eagle, a Nazi eagle. You get it? You get it? You get it? You get it? It's like, okay, cool. But I actually think the book is more nuanced than that. It actually really makes me mad the more I think about it, that Verhoeven kind of bastardized this, and this might be the one shot to have done a real Starship Troopers product like this. Not that it did poorly. I think it made its money back, basically, but it wasn't like a huge hit, the Starship Troopers film. But what do you think? What do you think about? How do you see the society that they're describing, a global Terran society? It's through an American lens, but the world has been at some point unified. I wonder what you make of this idea of different stratas of citizenship, because it's like, we don't live in that world. I don't really want to live in that world, but I don't hate it. Like the idea that you have to sacrifice something for us in order to have full citizenship. It's like, that's kind of righteous, isn't it? I mean, isn't that kind of the way it was for a long time? Like, what use are you to the group if you're not going to, like, why do we give a fuck what you think if you're not going to help us achieve the goal of whatever? That's right. Probably a pretty normal outlook until maybe this century or last century, really, when everyone's like, no, everyone gets the vote and we all have the say and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's the reason I don't mind that, is because I think it's the most perfect of a series of imperfect governmental systems. But I don't know that the idea saying like, oh, people that don't give anything shouldn't get anything. What you get is to live in the society unmolested. And that seems to be what they're saying. And they're saying that it's not only unmolested. Again, going back to Rico's parents, it's like they're rich and well-to-do and have nothing to worry about in terms, and they don't care that they don't get the vote. That's the big thing, is like they don't care. And I wonder if that's an almost utopian sort of situation in some way, when people look at it as more dystopian. Yeah,
I mean, it's a really interesting conceit for science fiction. I think it's very clever, just in a fictional capacity. But I guess the one problem with it, if you applied it to real life, is that it's basically, right, it's rewarding people for putting themselves in harm's way, right? For the idea of sacrificing yourself for a cause. I guess it calls up patriotism, certainly, and that sort of thing. And you could still live a full, pleasant, profitable life like Rico's parents, right? The super wealthy, the very elite, but you don't have this certain set of, being able to vote and being a part of the fabric of what makes the machine run, unless you're in fleet or unless you're in mobile infantry. So unless you're a soldier. But the thing is, it's sort of, what if you don't have the tools? Like what if you don't have the tools to be a soldier? What if you're born with some sort of, malfunction or deficiency or some sort of health thing that, asthma or a heart murmur or something where you can't, you know what I mean? So automatically those people couldn't, you know what I mean? So you're basically penalizing people if they don't, a certain percentage of people, if they don't have the tools to do those things. So it's kind of ostracizing them and leaving them out by no fault of their own. That's the problem I would see about it. It does form this sort of hierarchy and this caste system, which is very interesting for sci-fi. I think about some of the best works of sci-fi, throughout film and manga and anime and everything like that, has that thing where it's like this caste system and, this hierarchy. But that would be the one thing where it's like, all right, but what if somebody wants to be a soldier? They just can't, again, that would be the one problematic aspect for me.
Dubois says at some point the following quote. Dubois, of course, is the teacher that is a veteran who ends up writing Johnny a well-timed letter that stops him from quitting the mobile infantry. But he says in class, quote, "This very personal relationship value has two factors for a human being. First, what he can do with a thing, it's use to him. And second, what he must do to get it, that's cost to him. There's an old song which asserts the best things in life are free. Not true, utterly false. This was the tragic fallacy which brought on the decadence and collapse of the democracies of the 20th century. Those noble experiments failed because the people had been led to believe that they could simply vote for whatever they wanted and get it. Without toil, without sweat, without tears. Nothing of value is free. Even the breath of life is purchased at birth only through grasping effort and pain." So I thought that was, it's like not wrong. I mean, he's
just having to earn it.
Yeah, he's foreseeing a collapse that hasn't yet happened, but there certainly is it's not an anti-democratic system through line in the book, because I really don't think that that's what it is, specifically because I don't think he shows a totalitarian dictatorship through a negative lens, but it is to say that the systems in which Heinlein obviously believes that like a level of decadence is going to destroy Western society. I think he's fairly accurate. I think it's just happening maybe a little slower than he thought it would, but I mean, that's fairly evident at this point.
He's definitely saying that in this book. Yeah. Which does not really come out in the movie, at least not the same way. It's said, if it's said in the film, it's said differently.
And about the mobile infantry, it's said, Johnny says this in reflection. He says, quote, "There are a dozen different ways of delivering destruction and personal wholesale via ships and missiles of one sort or another. Catastrophes so widespread, so unselective that the war is over because the nation or planet has ceased to exist. What we do is entirely different. We make war as personal as a punch in the nose. We could be selective, applying precisely the required amount of pressure at the specified point at a designated time. We've never been told to go down and kill or capture all left-handed redheads in a particular area, but if they tell us to do it, we can, we will." I just find it so interesting, the anti-nuclear reaction in this book. This idea that it's not going to change combat as we know it, because it can't. It's either indiscriminate and all in or nothing at all. And so they need to still face to face with their enemies. By the way, I thought this was pretty cool in the book. So in both the book and the movie, Buenos Aires is destroyed. And in the book, Buenos Aires is destroyed by an attack by the bugs, and it's the same in the movie, but again, diminishing the bugs' intelligence or spacefaring nature. It's kind of cool the way they explain it. Like the bugs system, Klandathu's system, has an asteroid belt in it, and they use the asteroids and shoot them out. But in the book, the humans are trying to hide where they're from, and they don't think the bugs even know the home planet that they're from. And then the bugs attack and have this like devastating attack on the home planet, which I think is really cool. They missed an opportunity to utilize that, I think, a little bit more. That would have been really
in
neat.
The film.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
That's like a super cool thing. Like that the humans are fighting and they're trying to stop them from tracking them back to where they're going. And they don't think they can.
Again, Battlestar Galactica.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like hiding the homeworld. we could fight on various fronts, but we're not, this one is off limits, our home front, that's off limits type of thing. Yeah. Very influential, man. Yeah. Definitely handled differently in the film. The anti-nuclear thing is interesting because there was a lot of literature back in this period throughout the 50s and the 60s after the bombing, the friggin' bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which still to this day is a very difficult topic for me to discuss because you and I have talked about it from time to time, but it's just so beyond the pale as far as like the worst of humanity for me.
You think so?
Like, oh, dude, I got into the worst argument with my second mom, PJ's mom, over this. Did I ever tell you about that?
No, I don't think so.
Because she was saying what you have often said, where it was like, if you really understand, and you understand a lot better than most people I know, if you really understood what we were up against with the Japanese, when they were our enemy during that time, hundreds of thousands of people would have died on both sides.
Oh, millions. Had
those bombs not been dropped. But it's so beyond the pale as far as the murdering of civilians that it sickens me to this day. Like, and yeah, I argued about it with her one night, and I still regret it because it got heated. You know what I mean? It got heated between me and her. And yeah, man, I'll never forget that. I regret. I mean, many years had passed of us being together, and we never talked about it again. It was fine, but it was one of those things. It was like, it's just in the heat of the moment, we just got into this argument, and it was just like, there's no, my whole thing was there's no justifying it, and her whole thing was what I often hear from the other side, which is like it was terrible, but it had to be done.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what you think should have happened instead.
See, I always feel a little uneducated when it comes to this because to be quite frank about it, it's like I'm offering up my judgment without really a solution, right? Because I don't know enough about that period of our battle with Japan over the course of World War II where I could really come up with substantial answers. I just don't have the history. I don't have the knowledge. But dropping the bomb, like just the terrifying nature of dropping those bombs on the Japanese people, which were non-military people. I mean, that's really what it comes down to me. That these were just civilians. They were just Japanese citizens, that type of thing. So for me, it was like, it's just one of those things where it's like, just the sheer terror of that. What do you being so much more knowledgeable about all of that stuff than me? What do people say? What do you say? And the people that really know the history and really have the answers, what were the alternatives there?
We could have waited for the Soviets were basically ready to fight Japan, and they were going into Manchuria to start taking, on their eastern front. So we had an agreement with the Soviets at Yalta and other places as we met with them. The enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of situation with the Soviets. So we were like, we'll go all in. The Nazis are obviously a bigger threat to more parts of the world. So we will clean them up. And then when we help you clean them up and they're done, then you guys and the British too go, and the Australians and everyone, we're all going to go and take care of Japan together. And that was the agreement. And that was beginning to happen. And some people argue that if we had just let it play out for maybe a few more years, which is a lot to ask, that like we could have just strangled them, even had like a complete embargo, nothing in, nothing out, starved them to death. But I'm like, this is wishful thinking, in my opinion, considering we were literally finding Japanese soldiers in the Philippines in the 70s who wouldn't surrender. And they had to go find like their literally have to go find like their officer from that era and bring them there and be like, the war is over. It really is over. It's over. It's been over.
That is nuts.
Years,
Holy shit.
There's a book by his name's Gian Greco. I can't remember his first name. It's a great book. It's about the attack, the way that the Army and the Marines and so on in the Navy were looking at the attack on Japan and like what was going to be necessary. And the reality is we would have lost, if we had to invade Japan, even with the Soviets, we would have lost hundreds of thousands of men. Probably we would have killed millions of Japanese people. I mean, it would have been, you could imagine like a major eradication basically of an entire race that was completely fanatically trained to fight. They were being trained to roll under tanks and stick bombs to them. They were being trained to use spears to fight to the last man, woman, and child. They were being told that they were going to be raped by any soldiers, so they might as well die fighting. And
my God,
it would have been hard. It would have been a complete, like, I just don't know what people don't get about that. And it bothers me. It's like one of those very easy things to take. And I'm not saying this for you. I'm saying,
no, I know what you mean.
Point where it's like saying this is so obvious. You don't have to do that. And it's like, no, there's nothing obvious about it. You want to know what's not obvious about it is that they didn't surrender after Hiroshima. That was what was obvious, that they had a fucking death wish. Now, I get that they probably thought we didn't have more than one bomb. I would have probably reasonably thought that too. It's like, oh, there's this mega weapon. We didn't have that many. We had 4. So we didn't have that many options. We weren't going to rain them down from the sky like Truman promised because we didn't have enough. We would have had, I think, 8 more that fall by the time the war was over. And we would have used them for sure. I mean, the other thing is that when we were invading, the invasion plans called for us to like use more smaller tactical nuclear weapons to prime the beaches and stuff. We would have nuked Japan much worse, with much more radioactivity and all the rest. It seems obvious to me that unfortunately this was the best possible outcome considering the actual situation. And it's important to note that we didn't ask for this situation. And I think that is incredibly relevant. They attacked us. We tried to subjugate them over and over again, push them back. And when we pushed them back to the home islands, they still wouldn't surrender. We drop a nuclear bomb. They still wouldn't surrender. We drop a second bomb and they still didn't want to surrender, some of them. And then finally it happened. So I don't think it's an ideal situation by any stretch of the imagination, but we would have lost so many people would have died. So many more people would have died. It
would have been a lot worse.
Many more people would have died than died in those bombings. Japanese people. Again,
it's my opinion without the historical. Now, what was the timing between the dropping of the 2 bombs? That's something I don't know.
It's like 3 days, I think, something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay. And they were just like, nope.
Yeah.
We're not.
Well, because there was this idea that we could drop one. So we had 4 and they were of 2 different types. We had to build them by hand, and we used one to test the Trinity site. So we had 3 left. And then we were going to drop one on Kyoto. And then MacArthur was like, oh, you can't drop it on Kyoto. You just can't. So we went and looked for other.
Too populous.
No, it was like he went on his honeymoon there apparently and was like in love with the city. And it was like, it's just too holy to them. The ancient capital and stuff. Like you just can't, because they were looking for places that we hadn't fucked up. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know that part of the use of the nuclear bomb was to learn how much damage it would do. So we intentionally found places in Japan that we hadn't bombed conventionally.
Oh, no, I didn't know this.
Which is why Tokyo and others weren't a target, because Tokyo got firebombed, like conventionally firebombed into oblivion. So there was nothing. So it would have been hard to tell the damage. Hiroshima, I think Mitsubishi had a factory there and it was relatively intact, and they wanted Hiroshima so that they can see how much damage the bomb did when it, before and after pictures. And I was recently talking on another show that Nagasaki's bomb didn't work as well as was intended. It fell in a valley, and it could have been way worse than it ended up being. The blast was kind of captured by this mountain ring.
Oh, wow. No, I didn't know that. And Mitsubishi, of course, made the engines for the Zeros, right?
Right.
So they were.
Oh, yeah. All the Japanese companies, just like ours, they were all on a war footing, just like GM and Ford, and everyone was making our shit.
Right.
So yeah, Mitsubishi and Toyota and Nissan and all these guys were making all sorts of things. And so, yeah, we wanted to bomb them and then get like before and after pictures to see like what it did. So it was sadly an experiment as well. Is there a way that we could have gotten away from it without the bloodshed? I suppose, but we wanted the war to be over. It's very complicated to look at in hindsight, like people that were fighting the Nazis were getting turned around, sent on a boat back to the United States, across the United States to California, and then shipped out again.
Right.
It's like, how much do we also want to put on our guys, and how many people do we want to die?
That's brutal.
Dudes that fought on Normandy and then are going to go fight on the beaches of Japan and die there. It just seems unjust. Like what more do you need? If we have this weapon, like I personally don't look at it as anything other than an obvious answer. We have this weapon, it can end the war. We don't know. By the way, you have to be a historical relativist. We do not know the pure nature of the bomb. We do not know about the arms race it's going to unleash. We do not know that the Soviets are spying on the Manhattan Project and have their own version of the bomb in the works. There's just a bunch of things we don't know. So going back and doing it differently, I think would be a great disservice to history, just because I think that it would cause, I think the Japanese would be the first to admit, like, there would be a lot fewer of them if we invaded Japan.
I mean, it's fascinating. It's horrifying to have to go back and think about such a tragic time and such a huge tragedy on a mass scale. But yeah, it's interesting to think about, what could have happened, especially with a little more political knowledge and texture and, yeah.
But you see it, and you see that in this book. So we're 15 years removed from the bomb or so, and a little less. And you see that tension playing out here about now they know. I mean, now that, and certainly in Starship Troopers, hundreds of years in the future, they certainly know what these bombs can do. And they talk about how they don't want to use them indiscriminately and that they don't. Again, this seems anti-power, like anti-fascistic in some way. It's confusing. In reading
a lot of it does.
Yeah.
A lot of it does. I think people take it in one fell swoop, or like one huge dose, and just try to pigeonhole it. But there's a lot more nuance to it than that. Whereas the movie is clearly poking fun, at the American military machine. Let's just, again, it's a very Euro take. And Verhoeven, that's the thing too. Like, he already had the success of RoboCop, Total Recall. He was a force to be reckoned with. So he was given carte blanche, really. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, just take this. And I guess it's going to be more Verhoeven type of thing. But he brings a very specific flavor. But people already knew that. You know what I mean? It was foolish to think he was going to do Heinlein's book. Like, it just wasn't going to happen. It's so fast. You know what the other fascinating thing is, man? I didn't know this until I jumped down the rabbit hole for the episode, for the pod, but there's a 6-part anime OVA from the late 80s of Starship Troopers, which I had no idea about. And I just watched a smattering of it briefly. It's on YouTube, actually.
Is it good?
Sunrise, Bondi, very 80s, but there was an adaptation before this. So
did you like it?
I love 80s anime. Like, it's all hand drawn. It comes with that very specific flavor of cell painting and a very sort of specific aesthetic. I love 80s anime. It's so nostalgic for me. But it looked pretty legit for its time. It looked like a nice kind of a depiction and reimagining of the battle armor and the ships. Again, I just watched snippets, but it was pretty cool. I wonder how much in watching it. I'll have to go back and watch it. I think it's 6 parts, each part being about a half hour, 25 minutes. So, it adds up to a long feature film. But I wonder how influential it was on Verhoeven and the live action version, or the versions to come, which I've yet to watch.
There's another Mr. Dubois little rant that I thought was interesting. This, I think, speaks to reality in our world today. I want to know what you think of it. He says, quote, and this, Rico is reflecting on the Dubois thing. He says, quote, "I found myself mulling over a discussion in our class in history and moral philosophy. Mr. Dubois was talking about the disorders that preceded the breakup of the North American Republic back in the XXTH century." So again, this is one of those things I was referencing where this looks like it would be 24th, 25th, 26th. According to him, there was a time just before they went down the drain when such crimes as Dillingers were as common as dogfights. The terror had not just been in North America. Russia and the British Isles had it too, as well as other places, but it reached its peak in North America shortly before things went to pieces. And he says, quote, "Dubois told us law-abiding people hardly dared go into public parks at night. To do so was to risk being attacked by wolf packs of children, armed with chains, knives, homemade guns, bludgeons, to hurt or at least robbed, most certainly, injured for life probably, or even killed. This went on for years, right up to the war between the Russo-Anglo-American alliance and the Chinese hegemony. Murder, drug addiction, larceny, assault, and vandalism were commonplace. Nor were parks the only places. These things happened also on the streets in daylight, on school grounds, even inside school buildings. But parks were so notoriously unsafe that honest people stayed clear of them after the dark," end quote. And then, so this is where things get crazier. It's like, so Rico continues in his own, mind. I had tried to imagine such things happening in our schools. I simply couldn't, nor in our parks. Our park was a place for fun, not getting hurt. As for getting killed in one, Mr. Dubois, didn't they have police or courts? He answers, they had many more police than we have, and more courts, all overworked. And then another boy says, I guess I just don't get it. If a boy in our city had done anything half that bad, well, he and his father just have been flogged side by side, but such things just didn't happen. And so Mr. Dubois at that point gets into like juvenile delinquency and stuff. I'm like, wow, how accurate. We have a bigger police state than ever. More people in the courts, more administration. Crime is rising, is on the rise again in the United States. What do you think about this? About the idea that they're so if this is fascism, then what they're describing is safety. Fascism is safety, and democracy is disorder. That's why I just don't think that that's a really accurate representation of what the book is supposed to be. It's surprising to me that smart people read it differently than that.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. And it doesn't read that way to me. I mean, I love the historical texture just in terms of fiction and the world building. And when you set something, this far-flung futuristic work of fiction, you could say, this is what happened then, and this is what happened hundreds of years ago. It makes it feel so real. It grounds it. And also kind of answers the question, like, why South America? Why Argentina? You know what I mean? Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it. Okay. Now it's starting to make sense. The pieces are falling into place. There's a lot of that in the book. And again, a lot of conversation, a lot of exposition. But if you're really paying attention, and I got a lot of that through just listening to the audiobook too, which I felt was a nice way to fill in the blanks for me of what I missed in the text. But yeah, it's really well written. It's really well realized, and it's kind of prescient in a way, man. Like, how did this guy was calling it? Like, that's the fucked up part. Like, decades out. How do you do that?
Yeah, I that's what's so incredible about it to me is not only from the moral standpoint and the political standpoint, but again, the space standpoint. This is really before NASA's even a thing.
Yeah.
Like, this is when they're just kind of getting going with and getting certain things off the ground or whatever, literally. So I am fascinated by that as well. Dubois says this later, Dick. He says, we have such a theory now. We can solve any moral problem on any level. Self-interest, love of family, duty to country, responsibility towards the human race. We are even developing an exact ethic for extra-human relations. But all moral problems can be illustrated by one misquotation. Greater love hath no man than a mother cat dying to defend her kittens. Once you understand the problem facing that cat and how she solved it, you will then be ready to examine yourself and learn how high up the moral ladder you are capable of climbing. And he's talking now about the kids that we just described. These juvenile criminals hit a low level. Born with only the instinct for survival, the highest morality they achieved was a shaky loyalty to a peer group, a street gang. But the do-gooders attempted to appeal to their better natures to reach them, to spark their moral sense. They had no better natures. Experience taught them that what they were doing was the way to survive. The puppy never got his spanking, therefore what he did was pleasure, and success must be moral. The basis of all morality is duty, a concept with the same relation to group that self-interest has to individual. Nobody preached duty to these kids in a way they could understand, that is, with a spanking, but the society they were in told them endlessly about their rights. I mean, this is... I don't know. I mean, I find this very powerful. If this is fascistic, so be it, but I don't think so. He's describing 2024 in 1959.
He really
described
is.
It.
I mean,
he just described it.
It's incredible. And that's a little bit of like, I guess what he's saying there, to sum it up, is a little bit of spare the rod, right?
Right, of course.
Like that's exactly what this is. So, and yeah, you could see that. You could see that taking place over the last 10 years here for sure. I'd say globally, but certainly in the United States.
Yeah, this part this was all, we already talked about this. I can pull this out. Because again, with the women in the movie, right? Beautiful women everywhere and kind of the Battlestar Galactica type situation. On page 97, so about halfway through the book, he's talking about how he's on leave and you see women for the first time basically in the entire thing, which I think is somewhat interesting. Let's see. So
this book
yeah, go
is
ahead, I'm sorry.
translated. I have to say, like, it would be a much more cerebral ride. You know, it's very like you could see them reimagining this movie and being very faithful to the book. It almost feels like it could be a very A24 joint. You know what I mean? Like cerebral, trust the audience, doesn't have to have a lot of action. You could build it on conversation. You could build it on interesting world building. It's a little bit prophetic, you know? Like unless I'm missing something, maybe it exists, but you can see a faithful adaptation of the book working. And the cool thing is it would stand out from the existing film, at least this initial film.
Yeah, we need like a 6-episode HBO miniseries.
I like that idea better. That's better. Like a made for TV thing. I mean, look at how good Battlestar was, but this is even different because this, if you were being really faithful to the book, this would have even less of that knee-jerk action. There's no love triangle. In this case, a love square. None of the things that I think the movie studios try to hang their hat on, right? Because they want to fill up. They want the seats full of fannies.
Right. Like Carmen in the book is one of the women. I think he just goes on a date with her or something. Like it's like,
right.
I think he sleeps with her maybe, but like he is inspired by his peers to join the MI. But yeah, you could tell like after hearing about the, this is a random thing, but how there was that, I don't know if it was that Superman movie or something where that producer in the 90s was trying to produce it. And he was saying how he wanted to have a giant spider in it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And then so that giant spider ended up in another one of his films, which was Wild West, right? Yeah. And once I know that that's a very reductive thing, but once I realized that that's the way people talk about movies and ideas and films and shift them around, it's like, what an embarrassment, you know?
Dude, do you know how many movies are built, like big Hollywood movies are built around a nucleus like that? Like all I want is a big robot spider. Give me your movie. Like it's fucked up. If we only knew the amount of movies that started with that, like a conceit like that, like a totally shallow thing, and they'll build me a movie out of this. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Tip your cap to the filmmakers, right? But yeah, that's one sort of epic example of like what goes on. And it's so crazy. Like in this world, like you can't trust an audience to do an indie film. And for us to, you know, Jonathan Glazer just did The Zone of Interest. I think it's supposed to be one of the most powerful, you know, World War II Nazi movies ever. There's no action in it. You don't see what's going on inside the concentration
camps. Yeah, that's the one where they live in the camp, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they live directly behind
I would like to see that. It's supposed to be very disturbing.
Yeah, it's supposed to be fucked up. But that's what I'm saying. Trust your audience. You know what I mean? There's stories to tell. You don't have to hang it. You don't have to hinge everything on a giant robotic spider.
Let me ask you this. I don't know if you've seen this develop. So Helldivers 2 created a conversation about in the game. So Helldivers 2 revolves around something called managed democracy. And in Helldivers 2's universe, it is a fascistic society. Okay. And it has created this conversation thereby about Heinlein and Verhoeven and Starship Troopers. And then this conversation came up, not from the book, because a lot of people didn't read the book, and I understand that, but the movie, where there's this kind of left-wing theory, I guess, that the bugs are victims. And people have been making fun of this, being like, why would you ever relate to the bug race, even if they were the victims? Like, what is wrong with you? You know? Are they the victims? Do you feel bad for them at all? Like there is some like when they capture the brain, it's kind of like sad. He's using a psychic thing to like read his mind or read the bug's mind. It's like you said earlier, like he's afraid. And it's cool, but it's kind of sad. They like cut that thing off, like his tongue off or whatever with a knife.
Yeah.
And then do you feel anything for the Klendathu?
I know that was the intent to say, you know, the brutality of the humanity in their war machine, and the fact of like, it's just this violence force first. I mean, they say that, right? Like Michael Ironside's character says that, like, it's all about breaking the violence. That's the only philosophy, you know, that type of thing. But then I don't think they drilled down. Like, I get the intent and the satire and sort of those cutaways, war effort propaganda films and how ridiculous it is and silly. But then I don't know if they do enough to make the bugs not look like bad guys. When those giant tanker bugs come out, and now the bad guys have this kaiju, this flame-throwing kaiju that's taking everybody out. The bugs seem pretty brutal, right? And the whole bit with using the asteroids as weapons, it's like, I'm not sure. Again, it seems a little sloppy. Like, if you want to make the bugs the bad guys and say, like, look, why are we attacking instead of trying to gain understanding? Like, maybe we don't have to fight. I don't feel like the movie's saying that. I feel like maybe it was trying to say that at some point, but then it jumps into the eye candy and the romance and the pretty people and the disfigured mentors and all that kind of thing. And it's more visually satirical, but they lose the thread. You know what I mean? Like, if you're saying that, if you watch the entire movie, kind of feels like the bugs are the bad guys too. You know what I mean? Like, maybe at least they're on equal footing. Like, they're just as bad as the humans. You know what I mean? Maybe both sides could be making a better effort at peace or diplomacy, but then they're just brutalizing each other. So it doesn't, I know the intent is to say like big bad American military type thing, but it does, something gets lost in there. Like, they're not making the bugs out to be very sympathetic ultimately. No, not to me, really, not until the very end.
Yeah, the bugs,
where I think they realize in the cutting room, like, oh, we should celebrate its fear. Like, it almost feels like a thing of like, we have to put an exclamation point here. We got a little sloppy type of thing.
Yeah.
Let's remind everybody it's afraid.
I actually think it asks an interesting question in both the film and in the movie, maybe even especially the film, which is like, could we ever relate to this thing? Like, could you imagine encountering this insectoid bug race and having a conversation with it or something? Then maybe that's more powerful than we think, because it sounds kind of absurd. It's like, why the fuck would we have a conversation with these things? But they're actually intelligent and they think and they can react. And I don't know. I do find that whole thing fascinating of like, whoa, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's bad or it's evil. But they don't do a good job. In fact, they make the bugs look somewhat vicious, which is cool. But like, they constantly, I don't know if you notice, like whenever they kill one of the people, they throw them backwards, like towards like the group of like where they're waiting for them, like the corpses. You see that happen over and over again, which I think is pretty cool.
That's a great observation. Yeah. I don't think I realized that.
Like, in other words, they're like 4 or 5 times. Yeah, like 4 or 5 times they'll like take them and like throw them backwards. You know, like
throw them to the group.
Yeah.
That's really, that's the thing. Like, they're not clearly, like, the humans and the arachnids aren't clearly going after the same resources. They're not trying to colonize the same planet. There's no clear reason for the conflict. It almost seems like it's saying we're fighting for the sake of fighting. We're fighting because we're different. We're fighting because they're monsters. They think we're monsters. It's like the typical play on satirizing war and how it's unnecessary and why can't we be more diplomatic and why does it have to be shoot first, ask questions later, that whole thing. But yeah, I agree with you. They don't do a good job of making the race that's supposedly being brutalized seem like they don't deserve it. You know what I mean? And I think it's almost getting lost in the storyboards because it's so cool to make them look like these giant, brutal crab monsters attacking with their pincers and, you know, that sort of thing. I could not help but think, especially on this last rewatching, of thinking of Dead Space, though. It's like, why we know what we're up against. We know what these arachnids are. Why can't we design tools designed to cut these things' appendages off? Right? It almost seems like it was almost frustrating to watch this military fight the arachnids because it took like 4 or 5 of these Marines with their conventional machine guns, essentially, to take these things out. And then they just kept coming while 4 or 5 Marines are working on one, they just kind of keep coming over the top. It's like if you just had these tools designed to cut these things' legs off and immobilize them, you know what I mean? It's like you can't design better weapons. It almost seemed maybe that goes in with the satire of not having proper armor, like their arms are exposed. Like, why would you have exposed appendages? You know these things are going to go cut your limbs off. You know what I mean? It almost seems like Dead Space without the right weapons.
Yeah, because there's that scene. There's that scene where they talk about shooting one of their legs off, but he's like, he still has 87% capabilities. So shoot him in his
go for the nerve center.
Right, exactly, which is interesting. So they do try to speak to it a little bit at least, but I think
it's trying to attack a rhino with a slingshot though. It's like you can't have a better. Why not just pump it full? You know when Ripley pumps the grenades into the queen's embryo, it's like pump them full of grenades, pump them full of explosives. You can't. You have mini nukes. You know these sort of RPG nukes. That's kind of a cool idea. Use more of them. Fire it into the group. You know, type of thing. But again, maybe that's more the satire of doing it the hard way and how none of it makes sense.
They could have maybe. It's interesting. They could have, one of the things about the bugs in the book they totally ignore in the movie, which is that most of them are not hostile and cannot be hostile. And so this is like a caste system, like anthill with different groups, and they've realized that there are worker bugs and there are warrior bugs and there are brain bugs and there's a queen, which they've never actually seen before. And I think they say something even that they'll kill the queen themselves if you get too close or something. So they've never been able to get their hands on one. But I wonder why they didn't that would have gone a lot further to playing up the sympathies towards the bugs if that's what you kind of wanted to do by showing what they realize early on. Because when they first encounter them, they're mowing them all down, and then they stop and realize like a lot of these guys are not even attacking us. Like they'll literally just run away every time. And then they realize that they should save their ammo on them. And then that's used against them late in the book as kind of like a feint, because the bugs know that they now know that about them and are not fighting and killing them anymore, probably because they're constantly replacing them underground. And I wonder why they kind of cut that out. It would have made it more complicated on the CG front, I guess, but it would have been cool to show more helpless citizens, as it were, of the bugs. They just never even did that, which I think it's almost strange to cut that part out if you're trying to humanize them in some sense.
That is strange. Yeah, that is a weird choice. Almost operate more like conventional ants or
right. They say most of them are like those drone like they're harmless, and they talk about killing like thousands and thousands and thousands of them at a time, and then they stop doing it. And why did they?
Because they realize it's just a waste.
Right. It's like, and
they're not the warriors.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, why cut that out if you wanted to humanize them? That would have put such a fine point on it, you know? Yeah,
that's a really good point. And there are those little, I don't know, there's those littler, like tick-like, and they're not little, they're huge. They're like a size of a huge snapping turtle in the movie, but they're dissecting one. And then later on, towards the end of the movie, there's a bunch of them that run out amongst the crab-like warriors. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. But there are these sort of docile, sort of seemingly defenseless insects shown briefly, and then there's the tanker bugs, and then there's the brain center thing that finally is revealed at the end. But it's definitely not to the degree of the books where it's like, this is the way a bee colony behaves.
Yeah,
there's warriors, there's workers, there's queens.
They fucked the whole thing up with the bugs, really. Like they could have done such a cool job. There's a really great thing in the book where they're placing listening apparatuses in the bug hole, and they keep hearing like a low level hiss or like a hum on all of the mics. And they think it's the air conditioning units that the bugs built under. They're technologically advanced bugs. Like, it's so interesting why, like, they just make them seem like they're this very primitive, even when they're shooting, like their anti-aircraft guns are just the dudes pooping their things out. Whatever. Like, it's so strange. In the book, they go in a different direction. I'd love to see that reflected. I want to see like the bug spaceships, which exist in the book. I want to see their equipment and their weapons, which exist in the book, and all of the rest. It's like, damn, dude. I loved that when they're like, we think it's the air conditioners or whatever underneath.
That's so cool.
That's so creepy. Like, how do they do it? There's so much about them you don't know,
Yeah, they're much more mysterious in the book, and that's an important distinction, Kyle. I'm glad you brought that up. Like, they're completely represented as organic in the film, where they're technologically advanced, and I think even cybernetic, like in some way. Like, they have, like, don't the warriors have robotic attachments or something? Yeah,
like they have like an assortment of like weapons, I think, that they can like attack. Yeah,
they use weapons. Yeah. Which is you never see that in science fiction. That's so cool.
So, I mean, again, 1959.
Dude.
What?
Like, That's forward.
People must have been like, what in the fuck are you talking about? You know, like bugs with like little pincers and they're creating spaceships. And
that's even more horrifying than xenomorphs, which I think are a really scary monster because they're not only are they aggressive and unmerciful, but they could think, they could reason, they could act together, they could plot, they could sneak, they could hide, all that kind of thing. But this is even, can you imagine xenomorphs that have weapons? It's like now they could just fire long range at you and stuff like that. That's terrifying. So that is something that it's like they're almost bowing down to conventional monster movie things, or maybe even like zombie films where it's like kind of kaiju, kind of zombie, like a brainless enemy, you know, that it's cool for action, right? They swarm. They're kind of like, they have this hive mind that operate more like robots, or like a giant ant would behave if an ant was 3 stories high or something like that. They're just going to come at you. They're pre-programmed or whatever. But yeah, it would have given it so much more nuance if they did what they did in the book. And then you could kind of make it as hyperbolic and exaggerated as you want for the film, because I know you have to serve the masters of the visual medium. You know what I mean? You have to make it dynamic visually and all that kind of thing. So you could just play it up for the film. But yeah, that's an interesting choice.
To think about the difference between the bugs in the movie and the bugs in the film. This is said in the book by Johnny. Almost anyone else knew more about the war was going than we did, even though we were in it. This was the period, of course, after the bugs had located our home planet through the skinnies and had raided it, destroying Buenos Aires and turning contact troubles into all-out war, but before we had built up the forces and before the skinnies had changed sides and become our co-belligerents and de facto allies. So just that they raided Earth in the film. They sent, which is cool, again, very cool. Like they sent an asteroid from their asteroid belt and just ram it into Earth. But the idea that they came to Earth themselves as like a raiding party would have been sick to see that. You know, would have loved to see that.
Love that.
Clip of that would have been very, very neat. All right, Dig, anything else that you want to say? I mean, there's so much more. I have more notes, but I want to kick it over to you if you have anything else you'd like to get into.
I mean, I'm sure there's been other things since, but I did like the way, again, it felt like, I don't know, like it felt like a made for TV film or like a 90s teen rom-com film, the way it was filmed, you know, like the very even lighting, a lot of 2 shots, no breaking the line as far as the 180 degree rule, nothing really too dynamic from a camera perspective. It felt to me like a mashup of like a sci-fi movie like Aliens, but with a much more high school comedy atmosphere. And I thought that was really interesting way to do a satire. Like it felt like 90210 or maybe even something like Saved by the Bell, but then mashed up with like a traditional war film or a science fiction film like the Aliens universe or something like that. And I thought that was really kind of neat. You know what it ended up feeling like to me a little bit? Like the late 80s, early to mid 90s Star Trek, like Next Generation. That's what it felt like to me, except they showed more exteriors that were Earth-like, you know, which was really interesting. And I think a lot of those visuals, a lot of the acting and all that kind of stuff really does make for an interesting satire. I think it felt satirical just in mashing up the different genres. And the pretty people thing too that you mentioned, as far as like the young kids, the young school kids, the would-be cadets all being like starry-eyed and pretty, you know, and tan and attractive. And then the mentors and the faculty and the teachers being more grizzled and deformed and, you know, in different ways. And the way they were sort of horribly disfigured, but still gung-ho for the cause. Like I liked a lot of what he was trying to do in the first half of the movie, although it really goes against the grain of the book, which is interesting. And also the fact that I love this for Knockback because the film feels very 90s, you know, like Denise Richards, man, like I'm watching her in the film and it's just like, she feels like a real life anime girl, like very attractive, very streamlined, very hard not to look at. But you know what's one thing I realized about her? I couldn't even pigeonhole. She's been around, like her filmography. Denise Richards always feels very 90s to me, but certainly her film and television roles have gone all the way till today, especially through the aughts and the 20 teens. But she feels very 90s, but she's obviously beautiful, but she's a pretty good actress. Like she serves I think her and the rest of the cast really serve the intent of the movie really well. She feels more 90s than she feels like any specific 90s thing. But I think she does a good job in this movie, but she feels so much like a live action anime girl. Like I don't even know how else to describe her. She's like, even the silhouette she cuts feels like a cartoon.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I'm looking at her filmography now, and she's in that movie Money Plane, which Red Letter Media did
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think I saw something on their thing.
She's not bad though. It's not like, I know a lot of it is sort of like this 90s nostalgia, or she brings that eye candy thing, but she's not a bad actor. She really isn't. And I think you could say that for a lot of this cast. That who is he? Patrick Muldoon, who plays Rico's rival. He was good, and he feels like a young Christian. I thought it was Christian Bale at first.
Yeah, it looks
right.
Like
He's a very American Psycho, young Christian Bale proxy. But you know what the funny thing is, dude? And just looking at the Wikipedia, I think this might be a Knockback first. Certainly, it doesn't happen a lot. Like everybody, all the mainstays in this cast are still alive, which is interesting. I thought Michael Ironside was dead for sure. I had to look it up. And yeah, he was like, for at least 2 decades, I think it was a rule to have Michael Ironside in your war movie. Like it wasn't a war movie unless he was good. I think it was actually a law in the 80s and 90s to have him in there. He's a gem. He brings that Michael Ironsideness. I really enjoyed the cast. I really enjoyed this cast working in service of a satire. I think it just, not only was it felt retro and nostalgic, but I don't know, just the way all the players sort of worked in service of what they were trying to do in this movie. That's why I think the first half of the movie, which is not the action half, right? Before all the action really starts to get ramped up, I think the first half of this movie really works. I just think somewhere in the second half you lose in the satire. It's almost, again, it becomes Armageddon or Pearl Harbor. It's like, this is like a serious war movie. It's like, no, I thought we were doing a satire. It's like 2 different films.
It is true. There's a tension there for sure. A couple more things I wanted to read from the book. We went over some of this already, but I just love this lore building about the bugs. It says, every time we killed 1,000 bugs at a cost of 1 MI, it was a net victory for the bugs. We were learning expensively just how efficient a total communism can be when used by a people actually adapted to it by evolution. The bug commissars didn't care any more about expending soldiers than we cared about expending ammo. Perhaps we could have figured this out about the bugs by noting the grief the Chinese hegemony gave the Russo-Anglo-American alliance. However, the trouble with lessons from history is that we usually read them best after falling flat on our chins. But we were learning. Technical instructions and tactical doctrine orders resulted from every brush with them, spread throughout the fleet. We learned to tell the workers from the warriors. If you had time, you could tell from the shape of the carapace. But the quick rule of thumb was, if it comes at you, he's a warrior. If he runs, you can turn your back on him. We learned not to waste ammo, even on warriors, except in self-protection. Instead, we went after their layers. Here's a little Helldivers. Find a hole, drop down it first a gas bomb, which explodes gently a few seconds later, releasing an oily liquid which evaporates as a nerve gas tailored to bugs. It's harmless to us, and which is heavier than air and keeps on going down. Then you use a second grenade of HE to seal the hole. We still didn't know whether we were getting deep enough to kill the queens, but we did know that the bugs didn't like these tactics. Our intelligence through the skinnies and on the back of the bugs themselves were definite on this point. Besides, we cleaned their colony off shale completely this way. Maybe they managed to evacuate the queens and the brains, but at least we were learning to hurt them. I like that. Just thought that was a great piece. Wanted to note that.
It's like dealing, you know what it makes you realize, man? This is horrifying as a human and an earthling, right? Like if ants were the size of rhinos, this is what we could be dealing with. It all comes down to size. Like, thank God wasps and ants and spiders are the size they are, because they could be a force to be reckoned with if they were just big, right? It's food for thought. Also, this has put me off lobster for at least a couple of weeks. There's no way.
Lobsters and mech
There's
suits.
just not even. I couldn't even go there right now. You know, the other thing is, dude, that really shocked me because I was expecting to be very critical. The effects in this movie are pretty good. Mm-hmm. They hold up really well. There's a couple of problematic things in it, like the nighttime muzzle flashes are weird. You know, it looks very composited. They do that weird 70s speed up time dilation thing like they do for the Death Star doors, where they speed up time to make it look like the doors are going faster. They do that a couple of times to speed up a spaceship or a subway car or whatever. And everything in the environment is sped up. Like the people start moving fast. And I'm like, wow, that's really in the late 90s. You're still doing that? Like, that was
there's that one shot when Denise Richards is on the tram and she's going away.
Dude, it's so bad.
Yeah, it looks bad.
It's really bad. And then some of the exterior spaceship stuff, you could see it doesn't have the smooth motion. Like, it's wonky. The movement's wonky. It's not motion control properly. But man, like, shout out to SPI and ILM definitely did some stuff. And Tippett, for the creature stuff, especially, they did some practical creature stuff, but a lot of it was computer VFX. Late 90s era, I think it holds up really well. Like, the movement was good. The compositing. Yeah,
this was all done in 96 and 97, I think. So,
dude, it's incredible for its time. Like, I was like really struggling to find a lot of problems with it. You know, it moved well. It was calibrated and choreographed correctly. It was really like kind of a treat, because I was expecting to go in like, oh man, late 90s, like that era, sort of the tail end of practical meets earlier computer VFX. This is going to be a rough ride, but it wasn't. It really holds up. There's some stuff that doesn't hold up well, but you could criticize almost anything of that era for that, or, you know, this specific era for that, but I enjoyed it. I really got a kick out of it, actually. It's a little long.
It is long.
The movie's a little long.
I was a little bored with it towards the end.
Goes 20 minutes too long.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, by the time the action starts, I'm kind of like, this is kind of boring. You know, the movie, I liked it a lot more in the beginning than I did towards the end. But one thing that they don't go into in the movie, which is cool in the book, is that planet Sanctuary, which is like an Earth-like planet that the humans have colonized. And they talk about how they keep news of what's going on away from it, so as to not of what's going on in Earth and like with the bugs away from Sanctuary, so as to not like demoralize everybody. But I thought that people would find this funny, a sign of when this book was written. So he's talking about Sanctuary, Rico, isn't he? And he says, but I can tell you what sort of planet it is. Like Earth, but retarded. Literally retarded. Like a kid who takes 10 years to learn to wave bye-bye and never does manage to master patty cake. It is a planet as near like Earth as two planets can be, same age according to the planetologists, and its stars the same age as the sun and the same type, so say the astrophysicists. It has plenty of flora and fauna, the same weather as Earth, near enough and much the same weather. It even has a good-sized moon and Earth's exceptional tides. With all of these advantages, it barely got away from the starting gate. You see, it's short on mutations. It does not enjoy Earth's high level of natural radiation. And so he goes into how like they only have this very, very, very basic life form on like fern, like plants and everything on Sanctuary, and that anything that from the Earth that comes there and is planted there, like a crop or obviously a person or whatever, just totally overtakes them with no problem at all. So a little bit of a sign of like human imperialism, I guess, within the book, but described more naturalistically. But I just love the use of retarded, like literally retarded.
Little insensitive, Robert.
Like a kid who takes 10 years to learn to say bye-bye and never does manage to master patty cake.
Yeah. Yeah, you said retarded, Robert. We got it. It's like, no, I mean like an idiot kid. Yeah, I know. No, like a retard. So 50.
I love that. I thought that was funny as hell.
That's good shit.
Let's see.
Again, that's what, that's funny where but I mean, it is funny because it dates itself in those small details, but it really would have been cool to see a slightly more restrained, maybe amplified popcorn version of the book. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot you could do there with flashbacks, with the character relationships, with the conversations, with the world building, but you could throw in a little more action and make it a little more palatable for general audiences without Verhoeven coming in and doing the RoboCop treatment. I mean, this is what his decision was. This was his vision, but that's why I think you could have kind of met in the middle a little bit. So you could have more of this kind of stuff, not the retard thing that probably would work, but have a little more Heinlein in it. You know what I mean? Kind of be Heinlein meets Verhoeven rather than completely Verhoeven. But there's room to do another version now. That's what I'm saying. Like, you could do the art house version of this film.
There's a Sony film.
Stay close to the book.
I don't know if they still own the rights to it, but TriStar did this film, but it doesn't matter. Someone has to own the rights to Starship Troopers. In fact, Starship Troopers is probably, I mean, it's going to be in the public domain, right? In 20 years, something like that.
Yeah, it doesn't have much, maybe less than that.
Might want to just wait at this point.
That's the fascinating thing, though, too, Kyle. Did you hear about, supposedly, I didn't look into this very deeply, but there's a tabletop game or a board game of Starship Troopers that came out in the 70s, I want to say. And what's interesting about it is it might be one of the earlier, if not the earliest adaptation of the novel, but it visualizes a lot of the stuff. So it shows what the skinnies look like. It shows an interpretation of what the arachnids look like, what the armor looks like, what some of the tech looks like, the spaceships, stuff like that, which is interesting because it's not like this was the first adaptation outside the written page of Starship Troopers. Again, we talked about the anime series. So there was things that came before Verhoeven got his meat hooks on it, so it's worth going back, especially if you're a fan and looking at all that stuff, because this has been apparently this book went over my head. I kind of feel bad about that, especially somebody who took AP and honors English. I feel like this was an unintentional blank spot for me. I feel like I should have read this book a long time ago, but man, so influential. Like what rock was I hiding?
It's so good. The book is so good.
It really is good.
And there's so much room for, I know they did sequels and stuff, but in just delving into, like, in the film universe, but in just delving into all the stuff, there's so much to pull at, to tell prequel stories and to get a greater understanding. It's the previous world before the military took over was described like this. It says, servicemen are not brighter than civilians. In many cases, civilians are much more intelligent. That was the sliver of justification underlying the attempted coup d'etat just before the Treaty of New Delhi. We don't know what that is. The so-called revolt of the scientists let the intelligent elite run things and you'll have utopia. It fell flat on its foolish face, of course, because the pursuit of science, despite its social benefits, is itself not a social virtue. Its practitioners can be men of so self-centered as to be lacking in social responsibility. So, again, describing things as they are, I think, today, very much. But I'm just going through... What is this?
It is strange, though, to be that prophetic. I watched Heinlein in a couple of interviews throughout the 60s and 70s. Sometimes I think they had him on panels with Arthur C. Clarke, which makes sense, who is also very active and besides writing, working in Hollywood and stuff. But that's the thing. Like, these guys, specifically Asimov, Clarke, and Heinlein, like, they knew their knowledge, not just their strength and their talent as writers, but like their knowledge of politics and science is very Cormac McCarthy-like. Like, there was a lot more to this guy than just a writer. And I think that's how that sort of seemingly prophetic, forward-thinking, like nailing it, nailing the what's going to happen in actual real life in the future, just nailing it right on the head. There's something about that just a writer can't do, just a writer on his own can't do. Like, he knew a lot about, I guess, really kind of history, and then also just staying plugged into current events and politics and what was going on in science. Like, that's really in the text.
I like this one thing. I want to leave with a couple of this other stuff here, Dig, that I pulled up. One of them, actually, I think you'll find funny just from a personal point of view. There's a point where they talk about how they used to, he says, our unbreakable rule that every candidate must be a trained trooper, blooded under fire, a veteran of combat drops. No other army in history has stuck to this rule, although some came close. Most great military schools of the past, St. Cyr, West Point, Sandhurst, Colorado Springs, didn't even pretend to follow it. They accepted civilian boys, trained them, commissioned them, sent them out with no battle experience to command men, and sometimes discovered too late that this young, smart officer was a fool, a poltroon, and an hysteric. I was thinking about that from my own perspective because I remember having this conversation in college. Not that I was ever going to join the military, but I remember one of my friends in ROTC was telling me, he's like, oh, you ever think about joining the military or whatever? And I'm like, I'm not going to join. I'm like 21 or something at this time. I'm like, I'm not 22. I'm not going to become like a private. He's like, you wouldn't be a private. You would get recruited at like an officer's level because of your education and all that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking about, I had never thought serious about it at all. It was never a thing. I never wanted to be in the military, but I remember thinking like, that is insanity. You're going to take me. Yeah, like you get to, basically like people would know more about it than I do, but a person with a bachelor's degree wouldn't be a private first class. You would have to go through camp and stuff, but I think you become like an off. They go into this in it's a Band of Brothers where like they start importing or exporting like officers that are entering troop groups or groups of troops as replacements for officers who were dead but had never even fired a shot.
Oh, that's where Colin Hanks's character comes in. I think that's he's just like the college boy.
Right.
Yeah.
So that just from a personal point of view, I thought that I wanted to just note that because I remember being like, that's so. He talks about how crazy that is here, and I think that is crazy that anyone would allow that to happen. And then I thought this was interesting too. I thought this is about the vote, about voting in this world. It says, both for practical reasons and for mathematically verifiable moral reasons, authority and responsibility must be equal. Else a balancing takes place as surely as currents flow between points of unequal potential. To permit irresponsible authority is to sow disaster. To hold a man responsible for anything he does not control is to behave with blind idiocy. The unlimited democracies were unstable because their citizens were not responsible for the fashion in which they exerted their sovereign authority, other than through the tragic logic of history. The unique poll tax that we must pay was unheard of. No attempt was made to determine whether a voter was socially responsible to the extent of his literally unlimited authority. If he voted the impossible, the disastrous possible happened instead, and responsibility was then forced on him willy-nilly and destroyed both him and the foundationless temple. Superficially, our system is only slightly different. We have a democracy unlimited by race, color, creed, birth, wealth, sex, or conviction, and anyone may win sovereign power by a usually short and not too arduous term of service. Nothing more than a light workout to our caveman ancestors. But that slight difference is one between a system that works, since it is constructed to match the facts, and one that is inherently unstable. Since sovereign franchise is the ultimate in human authority, we ensure that all who wield it accept the ultimate in social responsibility. We require each person who wishes to exert control over the state to wager his own life, and lose it if need be, to save the life of the state. The maximum responsibility a human can accept is thus equated to the ultimate authority a human can exert. Yin and yang, perfect and equal. Doesn't sound, I mean, again, like we don't live in that world. I don't want to live in that world, but it doesn't sound bad.
It's a world.
It sounds fair, right? If that's fascism, then I guess there's some level of how people would interpret fascism as, I guess that's obvious, as like some sort of idealistic pursuit.
Yes.
But I guess that's true. I guess that's true about communism too. So that's not really that unique of a thought. But I guess
idealistic is the right word, I think, for at least from Heinlein's perspective. And I don't know what his personal politics were, but that's what it seems like he's building here. Something, at least maybe it's not something that he necessarily agrees with in real life, in real time, but in this world, that's kind of the tapestry he's creating with this sort of backdrop.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by people's interpretation of this. It's so sledgehammer like it's so much deeper than that. The nuance of it. I pulled all my yellow tabs out here. There are. So
wow, you got them one by one.
So
nice. Hey,
I haven't done that to a book in years, since college probably. So, but it's short enough to be able.
That was a treat.
Yeah, that was fun. It's short enough to just kind of jump around like that. And I don't know. I don't know if people enjoyed our conversation about Starship Troopers, but I enjoyed it. It was fun to watch the film again for the first time in many years. It was fun to read the book again for the first time since high school, reading my copy from high school, which is, unique. That's the version of the book. So That's pretty cool. You went out and bought it, right? Did you find it on a shelf or did you have to go to Amazon?
No, I didn't even buy it. I got it from the library.
Oh.
I was really hoping they had it. They didn't have it at the one branch, and then they had it at the branch that was actually closer to my house. So it was fortunate. So I have it over there. Yeah, I just grabbed it from the library, man. I said, hey, but it's definitely a book worth owning. I think I looked at it after the fact. You could get like a nice hardcover for like $14 or something. This is one for the bookshelf. What I love about this, and I think this is rare to Knockback, is there's a 40-year span between the book and the film, which is pretty cool because you're exploring this thing from, decades apart. And the fact of this is, again, I know I mentioned it already, but this is Shining-esque in how different the book is from the movie. I think it might be the most different. I know I always pick on Michael Bay's Transformers, but it's like, this isn't Transformers. I think it feels even more to me, between G1 animated Transformers and the abominations that Michael Bay created. Like, this is like the same. I'm not calling the movie an abomination at all. I really enjoyed it, but yes, different. I mean, that's why it's worth checking out both. Check out the written work, check out the film, and Verhoeven is so interesting, man. We haven't done Total Recall yet. It's going to be interesting to go back and tackle that middle one, and then there's Showgirls, and there's what else did he do? He did Fatal Attraction.
Right. That was
right. No, Basic Instinct.
Basic Instinct. Yeah, I think it was.
Basic Instinct.
I think it was Basic Instinct.
Right. I think Basic Instinct is with Sharon Stone.
Yeah.
Right. Is that the Sharon Stone one, or is that Fatal Attraction? Why am I getting confused between that?
It's Basic Instinct.
Yeah.
So yeah, it goes RoboCop, Total Recall, Basic Instinct, Showgirls, Starship Troopers, Hollow Man.
That's right. Oh, Hollow Man's another one. Yeah, he's an interesting cat. Still going, still cooking, still making movies. I haven't seen any of his more recent works, but he's an interesting one. He's always interesting for conversation. He's got a very specific perspective.
Yeah, he's been a con up because Red Letter did a Showgirls episode, which I thought was really interesting. So that came up recently.
That was a good episode.
We just did Starship Troopers, and then we did RoboCop recently. So yeah, he's been on the mind quite a bit. And yeah, so getting the Total Recall and Basic Instinct's the one where the woman like puts the rabbit in the. Doesn't someone like kill someone's pet by boiling it or something? That happened. That's in Basic Instinct, or is that Fatal Attraction?
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah.
It's like Verhoeven and Dagster. I've only seen it once. It's like that was enough.
Fair enough.
That was enough.
All right, Dag. Well, that was a fun conversation. Hopefully it'll be additive, especially to those Helldivers fans out there. I hope you enjoyed this episode. But just generally speaking, go read the movie is fine, I think, but the book is excellent. So go read the book and interpret it yourself and see if you agree with our interpretations or if you kind of agree more with the mainstream interpretation or have one of your own. That's what's fun about reading and watching and viewing and doing all these things. But Dig, before we go, let's end with a dad joke.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I mean, that's one thing you could say about the book and the film. Like, there's a serious, acute POV. Like, there's a definitely distinctive point of view perspective on each one. That, take it or leave it, like it or love it. It's there for you, All right. So I got 4 here that I don't think I read yet, but I like this one. Let's do this one. Kyle, what state do crayons go to on vacation?
I don't know.
Kyle, they go to Colorado.
Oh, that's interesting because it's Colorado is just spelt that. You don't even have to say it, right? COLO.
Oh yeah, it is.
Colorado,
it is spelled.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did it with a dash.
Yeah.
Make sure we knew.
Yeah. Very cute.
Oh, it's adorable.
All right, my friend. Well, I appreciate you altering your schedule to accommodate me. We'll be back for more Knockback.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if we're going to stay off schedule still because we need some time for the next one, and I'm still shot. But hopefully, if I'm not better by then I'm probably had some sort of chronic illness, and we'll find out about that in between now and then.
Oh my God.
I was telling Mike I have long COVID, and she was just like rolling her eyes at me.
Long COVID's a thing, right?
I don't know if it really is or not, but I don't like to claim that people suffer from things that they don't exist. 'Cause clearly there's something about it, but I don't know if it's long COVID or it's something else,
What was the 90s long COVID? Epstein Bar. Right? Is that just what it's just rebranded? Is it Epstein Bar?
Yeah, maybe.
Rebranded?
That's funny, man.
I don't know.
That's funny.
I dated a girl at Epstein Bar, so I know, and she was the most taciturn, like she had no energy. Like she was just always, and I'm not going to say her name, but I think she did herself in by doing too much acid and ecstasy, and it took a toll on her. She was a sweet girl, but she was definitely, yeah, I think she got mono, and then that was the thing, right? Mono was the old COVID, and then mono led to Epstein-Barr, and now COVID leads to long COVID. Yeah. So we just have it's very 90s. I'm very nostalgic for mono.
Ramon had mono when we were a freshman in college, and he had to go to the hospital. Actually, I remember having to.
Yeah, no, that was serious.
I remember having to bring him his stuff
Jesus
from his room.
Christ, Ramon.
Yeah,
Ramon.
All right, my friend. Dave, have a good rest of your weekend. I appreciate you. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, that was fun, man. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Everyone out there, thank you for your love, kindness, and support. Couldn't do it without you. We'll talk to you soon. See you next time. Until then, goodbye. Knockback, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. Knockback's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Knockback, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.